Look who's here. Come behind the curtain and look who's here.
Same old crowd.
Yeah, go ahead.
Welcome.
Us too.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our 2019 House Democratic Issues Conference, 100 Days in, Fighting for the People. We are so pleased that so many of the members of the House Democratic Caucus have gathered here for 3 days of fellowship, of discussing issues, of working out an agenda for the people, looking back at the 100 days that we've had and moving forward to advance kitchen table pocketbook issues on behalf of the American people. We are pleased that every single caucus underneath the House Democratic umbrella is represented. The Congressional Progressive Caucus, the New Democratic Caucus, the Blue Dogs, the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the Asian and Pacific Islander Caucus, the Women's Caucus, the LGBT Equality Caucus, all represented here in Leesburg, Virginia. Over the next few days, we will focus on a variety of issues, but of course, the issues of importance to everyday Americans will take precedence. We will have a panel discussion on health care, a panel discussion on infrastructure, a keynote discussion by Jerome Powell on the economy, a discussion that reflects on race and class and bringing working people together in America, and a discussion on immigration and the gorgeous mosaic that is the American people, which is what makes this great nation a great nation. We're thankful for your presence, and let me now yield to the dynamic, the distinguished Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to congratulate you and Vice Chair Catherine Clark for bringing us together in a very meaningful way. This is a series of workshops of us coming together, and in some ways, although it was originally scheduled earlier in the year, I think it has an added benefit after as we observe the 100 days, because we can take great pride in what has happened in the past 100 years, plot how we go forward, listen to our members. Let's just talk about who our members are. I take such pride. You mentioned all of the caucuses that are represented, and within each and every one of them are a large number of our freshmen who are here as well. And in this class, where we have over 60 members who are freshmen, nothing compares to it but the Watergate class of 1974. Read about it in the history books. Sandy and I remember it from our youth, but you remember it as history. And that class was transformative. It was large. It was historic. Not one of them had a gavel in the first year of that Congress, of those Watergate babies. In this class, 18 freshmen have gavels, or subcommittee chairs. 10 of them are women. We have 7 women chairs of full committees, 39 women chairs, 39 women with gavels of chairs in subcommittees, and maybe even more. And so it is pretty exciting. So this caucus, which is a 60% or more women, people of color, LGBTQ, comes together. As I say to them, our diversity is our strength, our unity is our power. And that unity is how we're building consensus around issues here. One, and as the distinguished chairman, Mr. Jeffries, again, thank you, talked about, is our For the People agenda, which he helped form with David Cicilline and our distinguished chair of the DCCC, Chairwoman Sherry Bustos, For the People agenda. Lower health care costs by lowering the cost of prescription drugs and saving the pre-existing condition benefit, among others. Lower health care costs, bigger paychecks by building the infrastructure of America in a green way, and cleaner government. That was our agenda, and that's what we're putting forth. I want to focus so much on health care, because that goes right to the kitchen table, financial security of America's working families. It's about their health, but it's also about their financial health. So we'll be focusing on that. We all agree, whatever our different approaches are, we all agree that our goal is to have health care, affordable, accessible, quality health care for all Americans. And let's see how we get to that. And one way to get to that is to reduce the role of money in politics, and H.R. 1 is that route. And I think if there's any symbol of change from this 100 days that we are so proud of, is the passage almost immediately of H.R. 1, and continuing with that drumbeat across America, that the voices of the people are as important as any voice, and will reduce the role of big, dark, special interest money in politics. The people's interest, not the special interest, will be served. And that has an impact both on how people view what's happening in Washington and on what the results are in Washington as well. With that, I'm pleased to be here with the leadership of the House and House Democrats, and pleased to yield in this great state of Maryland to a leader of the Congress from the, oh no, we're in Virginia. I should know, because the president is talking about George Washington right now. Oh my gosh. Well, if you have any questions about that, I'll be pleased to answer later. But from the great state of Maryland, on the other side of the Potomac, our distinguished leader, Mr. Hoyer.
Thank you so much. I'm pleased to be here, and I want to apologize to the press. I understand there's some talk about my Argyle sweater that I did not wear this year. It is a little warmer than it was at the time we originally planned to have this conference. Hakeem Jeffries became our chairman, and distinguished lady from Massachusetts, Congresswoman Clark, became our vice chair. I've held both of those offices, and this is a big deal for our caucus, but it's also a big deal for them. It was a big undertaking. They've organized a wonderful, wonderful conference. Catherine, thank you. Hakeem, thank you for your leadership. We're very proud of both of you. And this is a time where, as Hakeem has said, not only the caucuses, but what that means is this caucus represents all of America. That's what you will see at this conference. That's what you see on the floor of the House of Representatives. You see all of America represented. I'm shocked that Nancy did not reiterate that 35 of the 63 new members are women, the majority of the new members of Congress. That's historic. 2 Native American women for the first time in history. 9 additions to the Congressional Black Caucus, additions to the Hispanic Caucus, addition to the LGBT and the Asian Caucus. We increased in every area of American society. Why? Because they wanted us to come here and work for them, or as Hakeem and Sherry Bustos would say, for the people. And that's what our agenda has been. On the first day we got there, we put legislation through to open up government. For the first time in history, the government was shut down by our Republican predecessors. And the Congress took over with a partially shut down government. And unanimously, we voted time after time after time until ultimately government was, in fact, open, to open it up in every which way we could possibly think that our Republican colleagues might accept. Unfortunately, it took them a very long time to do that. And then, as the Speaker has indicated, we passed H.R. 1. We had campaigned throughout the country on 3 premises. Number one, that we would work for jobs and wages and good-paying jobs. Number 2, that we would make sure that the Affordable Care Act was available for all the people so that their health care and the costs of their health care and prescription drugs would be brought down. Our committees have held hearings, are working vigorously on that, and we're going to be having legislation on the floor in the very near future to achieve those objectives. But H.R. 1 was put forward and was unanimously passed, which dealt with voting rights to make sure that every American not only had the right to vote, not only had access to vote, not only had it made it easy for them to register and vote, but to make sure that that vote was counted as well. And then we dealt with redistricting reform. We know the American people are concerned that the redistricting in the states is for the politicians and not for them. And so we passed redistricting reform to make sure that it was for the people, that we would have districts that would reflect their interests and be reflected in the Congress that way. And then, I'm proud to say, under the leadership of my colleague from Maryland, John Sarbanes, we passed a major campaign finance reform piece of legislation, which is going to try to eliminate dark money. Money coming in the politics of our country that the people don't know where it came from, don't know who's talking to them. And then, of course, ethics reform, which we also passed, which in part said that the president ought to give us tax returns. Why? Because he's the only person in America who can do something on his own. The rest of us have to vote collectively in the Senate and the House to know whether he's acting for the people or for himself. That's a legitimate question for the American people to ask, and we're asking it for them. And in addition to that, and lastly, I've been asked just to mention briefly infrastructure. When we talked about jobs and wages, good-paying jobs, we talked about infrastructure, because that is critical to America's competitiveness and to the creation of those good jobs that we need in this country, and the high wages that we need in this country for our people. Committees have held hearings on that. We've had meetings about that. We're moving ahead, and we want to do that in a bipartisan fashion with the President, with the Senate, and with the House, because we want to get that done for the people. Now, let me close with this. We've had 100 days of success, and yesterday was no exception. Yesterday, we set the spending levels for the Appropriations Committee so we can move forward in a timely fashion so that we can consider bills now with a deemed level of spending so that we can prevent the catastrophic, tragic, and unwarranted shutdown of government and do our business on time. So we had a victory yesterday, and we're going to have future victories for the people. Now I want to introduce somebody who has been working for the people for all of his adult life, the Democratic whip, the majority whip of the House of Representatives, my friend Jim Clyburn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leader. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for your leadership. Mr. Assistant Speaker, good to have you to join us. And Chairman Bustos, Vice Chair Clark. I have been spending a lot of time in the last couple of days talking with quite a few media people and discussing with them the transitions that have taken place in this country, reflecting on the recent death of Ernest F. Hollins, who I met when I was a junior in college, organizing sit-ins in Orangeburg, and he was the governor of South Carolina. He invited us to come meet with him in Columbia in order to discuss exactly what our grievances were. That started a friendship. Though we were on opposite ends of the spectrum, it started a friendship that continued all the way into the United States Congress with him in the Senate and I over in the House. Fritz Hollins, this is the 50th anniversary of the poverty tour that he took in South Carolina that I led him on. In January 1969, I took Fritz Hollins on a tour of Charleston's east side to expose him in a very meaningful way to the lives of people in Charleston. That resulted in him writing a book called The Case Against Hunger. And out of that book grew a significant expansion of community health centers throughout the South. These communities, just like they've resisted expanding Medicaid, back then they were establishing community health centers until Fritz Hollins wrote his book and went out. And then out of that book came what we call WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, programs we still have with us today. And so what we are doing in this caucus under this great leadership is using all of these experiences that these people have brought with them in the various, what I call sub-caucuses, and sitting around the table, utilizing those experiences in fashioning legislation. And I am so pleased that we are going to get into infrastructure issues, but this time there's going to be a broader discussion of infrastructure. It's not going to be just roads and bridges and ports and rail. It's going to be water and sewage. That's what is really tantamount. If you look at the front page of the Columbia, South Carolina State newspaper for 2 solid weeks, the front page story was about the tainted water that people are drinking every day throughout South Carolina. And it is throughout the country. It's not just Flint, Michigan. It's all over the country. I read some time ago when I studied this stuff called history, and people say, if there is another civil war, it could very well be fought over water.
Oh, in the West all the time.
Yeah. And so this caucus is focusing on these, not just tabletop issues, but the experiences that people have as they carry out their lives. And I'm particularly pleased. You know, I had a gentleman, I hope you'll get too upset, I had a gentleman come up to see me about the disaster relief he wanted for his farm. But he said to me, he said, I really came up here to talk to you about my cotton farm, but I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the people in my community who load their children up in their automobiles and take them down to the parking lot of the local library, and they sit out in their cars to do their homework because there's no place else for them to connect to the internet. That's an infrastructure issue that this caucus is going to focus on like a laser when we pull together this new infrastructure bill. And so I'm pleased with that, but I am also pleased with the fact that we in this caucus passed two significant pieces of gun legislation that nobody thought we could do. H.R. 8, expanding background checks in order to cover gun shows. And I'm pleased with that. And then we passed H.R. 1112 to look at closing what has become known as the Charleston loophole. And what were we doing with that? The fact of the matter is that 90% of all the gun sales in this country, the background checks are completed in 90 seconds. With 90% of the gun sales, background check completed in 90 seconds. 96% of all the gun sales, the background check is to be completed within the 3 days of current law. But 4% are not. So all we were doing with 1112 is taking a longer look at that 4% of purchasers who, for some reason, maybe by intent, maybe by mistake, for some reason something has shown up or something has failed to materialize with a background check. And so here we are on the other side of the Capitol, people not wanting to take up a bill because it may inconvenience 4% of all the people who are purchasing guns. For the people, we are responding to the dreams and aspirations of the American people in a way that none of us ever thought we could do in such a unified way. When you listen to the backgrounds of all the people that make up our caucus, they have various experiences. They all come together, and we have melded them into a cohesive body that's getting this work done for the American people. And with that, I'd like to yield to the distinguished Assistant Speaker, Ben Ray Lujan.
Thank you, Mr. Clyburn. Well, good afternoon, everyone. That's a little bit of silence. Good afternoon. My goodness. It's good to see everybody here today with energy and enthusiasm. First off, I want to congratulate our distinguished chairman, Hakeem Jeffries, and our vice chairwoman, Catherine Clark, for putting together what is going to be a solid caucus conference, getting together to talk about ideas, celebrating our diversity, and making sure that we come out of here stronger and more united than ever before. So about a year ago, when we were here, I had a chance to visit with many of you, and we talked about what was on the horizon, which was the 2018 election. And we made a commitment to you with the confidence that we all had, many of you included, that we would flip the majority, that Democrats would be in the majority in the new Congress coming forward. And there was still a little bit of question coming from many of you, but we got into the details and we talked about the elements of those races. And so here we are after flipping 43 Republican districts across the country. We had a net pickup of 41 seats coming off of flipping 9 Republican-held seats of the 2016 election cycle for this new Democratic majority. But there was a commitment that our new colleagues made. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate that.
We're all happy about that. That's why we're saying it.
No applause from the rest of you. I guess you're busy capturing these words. There was a commitment that our colleagues made, though, as they traveled the country and they were showing up in small towns across America. They were showing up. They were having very personal conversations with everyone that they interacted with, showing up in many of the small communities that had not seen their member of Congress. Many Republicans of the U.S. House that were refusing to have town halls, Congress on your corners, are showing up. And our colleagues made the commitment associated with that important package that was put together, not just by Speaker Pelosi, but by Hakeem Jeffries, by David Cicilline, and by our new chairwoman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Sherry Bustos, about an agenda that we could deliver that was based on an economic conversation with the American people. What could we do to lower healthcare costs, lower prescription drug prices, pass an infrastructure bill, H.R. 1, which is so instrumental, restoring the Voting Rights Act, as we sought to return ethics and also faith to the process. That's an important conversation where we've already delivered on the first 100 days, and something that I'm so proud of. So something just to share with you is that most of our Democratic colleagues have already held more public events and town halls than their predecessors did in the previous 2, 4, and 6 years before them. What I mean by not all of them have done it, they've already had many town halls. It's just that they haven't necessarily eclipsed 2 years of work. Give it another month and you'll see that. Andy Kim, for example, has had more town halls in the last 3 months than his predecessor had in the previous 3 years. Hundreds of public events over the first 2 recess periods in this cycle. So it's not just the commitment to the agenda that we've laid forth that will put the American people first. It's the commitment to continue to showing up. And I just want to congratulate all of our new colleagues who I welcome with all the energy and enthusiasm and passion and the freshness of the approach of the conversations they had with the American people, with transforming that into action and continuing to show up and transform the conversation that's taking place across the country where it matters most, in those local papers, local radio, local television. And I just want to say this about infrastructure as I turn this over to our vice chairwoman, Catherine Clark. Our Whip Clyburn talked about broadband and infrastructure. You all know the difference between fast internet and slow internet. You know when your phone's working, when they don't. And while I appreciate very much that I can get on a plane, whether it's flying out of Albuquerque or out of Los Angeles, and I can fly all the way to Washington, D.C. or New York, and I can get online, I can be connected, I have a pretty decent internet speed, you can stream movies, you can correspond with anyone across the country. There's something terribly wrong in America when you cannot connect when you're on the ground, flying over those same communities when you're at 30,000 feet. That's the infrastructure that we're talking about. The packages and investments that are needed in rural America. I represent a district that's 47,000 square miles. It takes 8.5 hours to drive across it. You all have heard me talk and joke about this. A lot of 2-lane roads, some of them pay, some of them not. As we talk about investments in this country and the importance of the conversation that Sherry has especially led out in the Midwest, there's a lot of work that we have to do to continue to deliver with investments in this country, make sure we're connecting the entire beautiful part of America that we know is so important to our future as well. So with that, I want to turn this over to our vice chairwoman of the Democratic caucus, the distinguished woman from Massachusetts, Catherine Clark.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I am so delighted to be here. Hakeem, we made it. We're here, and so grateful to be here with this incredible leadership team. I am also incredibly proud to be part of the 116th Congress that celebrates the largest class of Congresswomen in the history of our country. And what does it mean when we have these new perspectives? We have so many firsts: the first Muslim Congresswomen, the first Native American Congresswomen. What does it mean? It means that we take those perspectives and we look at our For the People agenda and we turn it into action. That's the power of voting in a Congress that looks like our country. And I can't think of a better example of that than what happened just very recently. A fundamental right for women that was passed with 239 House co-sponsors, every single member of the Democratic caucus, and that's the Paycheck Fairness Act. We know that women still make 80 cents on a dollar of what a man gets. And we know that is worse for women of color. And what that means over a lifetime is $500,000 in lost wages. And by passing this was a bill I talked about on the campaign trail. And it's a bill that Rosa DeLauro and others have been trying to get through Congress for decades. And now here it comes within the first 3 months of this new majority. That's the power of having a for the people agenda. That's the power of using those perspectives and these new members of Congress to make a real difference in the lives of not only women, but our economy. $900 billion put back into our economy when we pass this bill. That we cannot say that we value women without enacting the legal protections to prevent those sort of structural inequities. That's what this caucus work is. That is our focus. We understand that these are the type of bills that make a difference to families, that allow them to, when they can have a fair shot at the American dream because they're being paid fairly. That is why I am so excited that this caucus and our For the People agenda are just getting going, and that we are going to keep uniting and rallying around issues like this that make a difference fundamentally in the families that we serve. And I am also very proud that we are here in Merritt, Virginia, or something like that, Merritt-Virginia. But here in
Across Maryland's river.
but here in a district now represented by Jennifer Wexton, who was one of our red to blue candidates in the last cycle. And that's exactly the type of seat that our chairwoman, Sherry Bustos, is going to be defending and expanding our majority, and I am proud to have her come to the podium next.
All right.
Thank you, Chair.
Catherine. I'm also proud to be east of Illinois, and since we all seem to be geographically challenged up here, let me try to bring this full circle right now, and I'm gonna close this with the political end of things. Everything that these wonderful folks have just been talking with you about, all of the, when we're talking about clean water, when we're talking about equal pay for equal work, when we're talking about civil rights, bringing down the cost of prescription drugs, rebuilding our country with $1 trillion infrastructure package, all of that only happens if we stay in the majority and if we continue to grow the majority. So my job for the next 2 years is to do exactly that. My job here at this conference is to talk about how we will do that. So this isn't necessarily breaking news, but what we'll be talking about is the fact that we have, earlier than ever before, announced what our battleground districts are. We've got 33 throughout the country. We have announced who our frontline members are. There are 44, 40 of whom are freshmen. And just this past week, and we'll go into detail of this as our conference wears on, we are making a multi-million-dollar investment in hiring field managers all over this country. 60 in all will be in place by the end of this month. So that is our strategy going forward. It is very clear that we cannot rent these districts that we picked up under the leadership of these folks right behind me and over here. We cannot rent them. We have to own them. And that is my job over the next couple years, and that's what we'll be talking about a little bit later in this conference as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Jeffries to lead our Q&A session of this. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We have a few moments for questions before we start the issues conference at 5. Any questions?
I wanted to ask you about the kind of abrupt dismissal of DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen and whether or not Democrats will ask for her to testify before Congress, all the border issues that you have been concerned about, but also the nature of her dismissal.
Well, I think that will be a decision that will be made collectively and, of course, led by Chairman Benny Thompson of the Homeland Security Committee and Chairman Jerry Nadler of the Judiciary Committee. The fact that the administration has a difficult time retaining individuals or attracting qualified individuals is a problem for the republic because it doesn't seem as though it's a fully functional executive branch that has real implications for the American people.
Do two questions. Jumping off of that, DHS released a statement about 10 minutes ago saying that the acting director of ICE has resigned. On resignations, a lot of changes to DHS in the past couple days. If I could get both of you to respond to that, how concerned are you about these changes? And then
I'm going to yield to the speaker, but the administration obviously continues to be in meltdown mode.
I said 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago, when the administration first came in, if you want to work in the Trump administration, know your blood type, because it's a very dangerous place to be. You'll be thrown under the bus sooner or later. That's really sad because the Secretary of Homeland Security, I had an appointment to speak with her at which would be 4 o'clock in the East, 5 o'clock in the East, and 2 o'clock in California on Monday. And at 1 o'clock, she didn't realize that she wasn't going to be available for a call at 2 o'clock. It came as a surprise to her that she was leaving that office. Now, let me just say, I'm no fan of the policies that she implemented. But what you see happening there is the succession is that the deputy will become the secretary. And so they have to replace everyone so that the president can get his new team in there. What is happening on our border is something that is so contrary to the values of our country, so undermining of our commitment to family values, and that this administration just is in a downward spiral of indecency. And now the president is saying he is the decider on how all of that goes. Well, we've all known that. This is his agenda. We have to have comprehensive immigration reform. That is one of the answers that is necessary there. We're capable of it in a bipartisan way. The Senate did it a few years ago. The House wouldn't bring it up. The president has put forth his criteria. He had the Senate Republicans and Democrats came together, proposed something to him, and then he walked away from it. So we just have to just restore order on the border, order in the White House, so that we can address who we are as a nation. Ronald Reagan, if you close the door to newcomers, you'll undermine who we are and our preeminence in the world. I can get my phone and read you the whole statement if you wish. But it is, let me just back up on this in terms of the bigger picture of we're here. I sat down because I am so inspired by our leaders to listen to the depth of their values, the extent of their knowledge, the strategic nature of their thinking. It always inspires me to listen to them and to listen to our colleagues as well. And on a political note, I want to thank our distinguished Mr. Ben Ray Lujan, our former chair, because when we won that election, actually, we could have won it with women alone. We needed 23 seats, and we got more than that, but 23 in the districts that we had to win. We won 35, but 23 in the districts that mattered. And now Sherry Bustos will enable our tribe to increase as we go forward. But it was a very important statement because it was for the people. So again, who is there is all comes from the White House. It's all about the president, but we deserve better than that. Both in the, and I would add to the distinguished chairman, Mr. Nadler, and Mr. Benny Thompson, also our appropriator, Lucille Robert-Allard, who's been very active on this issue as well. And while we're on that subject of the Judiciary Committee, let me just say how very, very dismaying and disappointing that the chief law enforcement officer of our country is going off the rails yesterday and today. He is the Attorney General of the United States of America, not the Attorney General of Donald Trump. So again, as was said by our other colleagues in terms of Mr. Jeffries, our Mr. Chairman, said earlier that the way people are leaving and the rest, it's very dismaying. They're leaving in disgrace or with dismay, but it's all damaging to our country.
And then if I can, in terms,
I'm gonna yield to Stenny, but go ahead.
in terms of just what we're looking at over the next couple of days, I noticed you didn't mention having any specific breakouts or any sort of sessions related to the ongoing investigations related to the Trump administration. Why is that? You said that you guys plan to focus on issues that are of most importance to everyday Americans. Do you feel like that is not as important to most Americans? Is there a reason we're not seeing that on the schedule?
Well, we're a separate and co-equal branch of government. We have an oversight responsibility to serve as a check and balance on an out-of-control executive branch, and we take that constitutional responsibility seriously. But we didn't run on impeachment. We didn't run on obstruction of justice. We didn't run on scandal or the chaos, crisis, and confusion that comes out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue every day. We ran on health care. We ran on infrastructure. We ran on bringing our democracy to life. Those are the promises we made to the American people. Those are the promises we're executing on. Senny?
No, I'm fine.
I'm sorry.
The majority leader in the Senate this week said that he had started discussions with the Speaker about spending levels. How confident are you that you will be able to avoid a government shutdown? What is the tenor of the talk so far?
Well, from the standpoint of the Congress of the United States, we will be able to avoid a shutdown. That's I think the president once or twice burned might be once learned that he probably doesn't want to go to that place again. But Mr. Hoyer, Mr. Clyburn, Ms. Bustos, Mr. Wait a minute, where'd you go? Catherine Clark, we're all appropriators. And I've said over and over again, left to their own devices, the appropriators can come to their conclusion without poison pills coming from on high that have nothing to do with the appropriation of funds. They know the numbers, and that, as Mr. Hoyer said, they know the numbers. They know the competition for funds, and they have respect for each other and how we go forward. That's what we were able to do send a bill to the president that opened up government. It was very clear about order on the border. We gave him some resources and said, this is how we want to protect the border. So securing our border is never a question. It's always important to us. Bipartisan, bicameral legislation sent to the president, which he signed. And we think we have confidence in the Now, Mitch McConnell is also an appropriator, and we've all worked with him over the years. So I feel pretty confident, as Mr. Hoyer said, and he probably will again. We have our numbers. We will negotiate, and we will negotiate in a way that I think will make our members very proud, because we will have, again, domestic, non-defense domestic figures that will enable us to do great things for the American people as we protect and defend, but also recognize that the strength of our country is in the health and education of the American people as well.
Let me just add briefly to that, because I want to reiterate what I said. We had a victory yesterday. Our Republican friends would like to think it was not, and frankly, it was reported as somehow we lost control. I will tell you that Speaker Pelosi and I were in charge, along with Mr. Clyburn, for 4 years. We never lost a vote that we wanted to win. And very frankly, we wouldn't have lost any vote this week if we'd wanted to win. And we did win. We set the numbers. We set the numbers for the appropriations. And very frankly, in my view, the fact that John Yarmuth and his committee were able to report out a number, which is the number that we adopted on the floor of the House of Representatives, almost unanimously on our side of the aisle, to give to the Appropriations Committee the necessary direction that they needed to mark up their 12 bills. I believe those bills will be passed by the end of June, which I believe will be the earliest time all 12 bills have passed, certainly in the last 40 years. I've been there 38 years, so 40 years. Yes?
Do you expect that to happen at the non-defense and defense levels that Mr. Yarmuth specified?
That will be up to the Appropriations Committee, because as you know, we adopted a gross number. That is the total number of discretionary spending. As you know, only 30% of the money is that we spend every year is discretionary funds. But we have set that. We're on a path. Ms. Lowy is not here, but she's one of our leaders. She and I have been working. Both the leader and I have talked regularly to Senator McConnell with reference. He wants the cap set. Now, he didn't come forward because he wanted to see what we were going to do, but once the committee reported out a number, then he obviously wants to participate in making that number. Very frankly, at that point in time, we felt, the Speaker and I both felt, there was no point going forward with a caps bill when we were going to have negotiations between the big four. Clearly, we cannot pass a caps bill on our own. The Senate must act and the President must sign. The caps is set, the sequester is set in law. But we could procedurally set the numbers for the Appropriation Committee, and we did that successfully.
Before we leave, I just want to, again, say something, join Mr. Clyburn in saying something about Fritz Hollings. We're in different houses, but long before I was in the Congress, many of our colleagues, I don't think any of us were in the Congress at the time, many of our colleagues were advocating for a nuclear freeze. And that was a big thing of so many, Mr. Markey, so many of the members, that was their mission. And Mr. Hollings says, geez, or Southern words to that effect. What would it be? Nuclear freeze, down south, we consider that a summer dessert. But he was so wonderful, and we interacted with him in many ways from the House and Senate. And he was a great patriot, and he and his wife were just so lovely to all of us and welcoming to us. And he was a great patriot, and it's a loss to our country. But Mr. Clyburn, thank you for speaking so much about him to the press in the last few days.
Madam Speaker, can I follow up on your comments about the Attorney General? As a member of the Gang of Eight, do you have any doubt in your mind that the foundation of the counterintelligence investigation of the President's campaign was sound? There obviously, now former chairman of 3 House committees have all raised doubts about that. And do you have confidence that the Attorney General, in this investigation of the investigation, will conduct it in an appropriate manner and potentially prove your point?
Well, let's just say, first of all, we want to see the Mueller report. There was an assault on the integrity of our elections in our country, the basis for our democracy. There is no doubt about that. There is a high confidence consensus among all of our intelligence agencies that such an assault took place, and it took place by Russia. And so you would think that every resource in our country would say, we want to make sure this doesn't happen again, instead of engaging in this silliness. No, it isn't silly. It's too serious to be silly. This obstruction of giving the truth to the American people. So I have confidence, yes, that in intelligence, and from what I have seen, but I can't confirm or deny, from what I've seen as a Gang of 8 member, I can confirm or I can just talk about what I and others have seen in the public domain. In answer to your second question, no.
There will be additional opportunities for us to communicate throughout the issues conference. Thank you for your presence.